Settle in, perhaps dim the lights around you. Let the cool quiet of the room hold you gently. If you have a blanket nearby, this is the time to pull it close. Feel the soft weight settle across your body. Tonight I'll be your companion, guiding you into a tale of curious crimes from Victorian times, those odd little stories that sound like fiction, but in the dusty corners of history really happened. And before we begin, let me whisper just this. If this calm journey helps you unwind, if your eyes grow heavy and your breathing slows while you listen, you might gently tap like or subscribe, but only if it feels right. Nothing urgent, nothing pressing, just a quiet gesture like setting down a teacup after the last sip. Oh, and one more thing. If you'd like, you can share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I'd love to imagine this story weaving its way across different corners of the world at different hours of the night. Now, let us drift into the flickering lamplight of the 1800s. Imagine cobblestone streets slick from a light rain, the distant clip-clop of a horse-drawn cab, and the faint hum of voices seeping from gaslit taverns. London, at once bustling and shadowy, was home to many odd characters. Some were swindlers, others pranksters, and a few were criminals whose schemes were so peculiar that today they read almost like bedtime riddles. One such tale begins not with violence or grandeur, but with cheese. Yes, you heard that right. Cheese. In the year 1843, in a quiet little shop tucked between a bakery and a cobbler's storefront, a thief was caught not stealing coins or jewels, but entire wheels of Stilton cheese. Can you picture it? Heavy rounds of crumbly, pungent cheese, stacked high like miniature wagon wheels. The thief, a wiry man with more daring than common sense, tried to smuggle them out one by one under his coat. It was less Ocean's 11 and more, well, something like a Victorian hot pocket heist. What's curious is not just the theft itself, but the almost comical seriousness with which the case was reported. Newspapers of the day described the man as though he were a master villain, his operations rivaling those of notorious highwaymen. And yet, when he was finally caught red-handed, or should I say cheese-handed, he was found staggering down the street, lopsided under the weight of dairy wheels rolling awkwardly against his ribs. If you pause a moment, you can almost hear the whispers of passers-by, the soft hiss of rain on umbrellas, the clinking of carriage wheels on stone, and amidst it all, the muffled thud of a cheese round slipping to the ground. The sound alone must have drawn more attention than he ever wished. And isn't there something oddly soothing about it? The idea that even in a century filled with industry, invention and social upheaval, people still manage to get into the silliest sorts of trouble. It reminds me of how even now, centuries later, our world is stitched together by the small absurdities that make life feel human. The court record shows that the cheese thief was sentenced, though lightly. Perhaps the judge, hiding a smile, recognized that the man had risked his freedom not for riches, but for a bellyful of Stilton. There is something almost tender in that, and maybe as you listen, you can let that tenderness fold into your breath. Inhale, exhale, like steam rising off a warm loaf from the baker's oven. And as we leave that rain-slick street behind, let your mind wander gently toward the next curious case. Imagine now, friend, that we step out of the drizzle of that cheese-laden London street and into another curious corner of the Victorian world. The air is still damp, but the night feels warmer, and there's the gentle crackle of a fireplace spilling from the open door of a tavern. A lantern swings slightly in the breeze, creaking on its iron hook, and inside, the room smells of pipe smoke, roasted chestnuts, and something faintly sour. Ale, perhaps, or maybe just the unwashed boots of men who've walked too many muddy miles. It was in such a tavern, in the year 1876, that a crime occurred which sounds like it should belong to a child's joke rather than a police blotter. A man was accused of stealing a parrot. Yes, not coins, nor silverware, but a brightly feathered, talkative parrot named Captain. The tavern's owner had kept the bird as a sort of living mascot. Captain had been trained to squawk at newcomers with uncanny timing, announcing "pay your tab" in a voice so sharp that some swore it startled them more than the barkeep himself. Now picture it. the tavern crowded with labourers, their mugs clinking in steady rhythm, when one evening Captain was simply gone. Vanished, cage and all. A parrot heist. The sort of thing that makes you wonder, was the thief desperate, hungry, or merely so charmed by Captain's wit that he couldn't resist spiriting him away? When the crime was reported, the constable at first thought it a prank, but soon stories spread through the neighbourhood. People swore they'd heard a mysterious squawk echoing from alleyways or drifting from behind shuttered windows. "Pay your tab," the voice would cry, startling cats and sending laundry fluttering from lines. London became, for a few weeks, a city haunted not by ghosts, but by the echoes of a missing parrot. There's a softness to imagining it, isn't there? The gas lamps glowing through fog, the sound of carriage wheels softened by damp cobblestones, and somewhere in the gloom, a feathered comedian repeating tavern phrases. Perhaps the thief had thought the bird would be a quiet prize, a colourful companion. Instead, he ended up with a squawking alarm clock, scolding him at all hours. Eventually the parrot was recovered, though not in the way anyone expected. According to the records, a constable following up on a separate complaint of unusual noises stumbled upon Captain in the thief's apartment. The man had stuffed the cage under a heavy drape, but the muffled cries of "pay your tab" betrayed his secret. One can almost imagine the officer lifting the fabric to reveal the bird glaring indignantly, as though personally offended at being hidden away. The punishment was minor, for the crime was deemed more foolish than malicious, but the tale remained, passed from mouth to mouth like an odd lullaby. People chuckled over it at taverns for years, telling newcomers of the night when London itself seemed to echo with a parrot's nagging. And here, as we let the sound of that voice fade into memory, you might feel the rhythm of your own breathing soften, steady as the ticking of an old wall clock. Perhaps you can imagine the tavern door closing gently, the warmth of the fire retreating, and the night air wrapping us again as we wander towards yet another peculiar Victorian tale. Step with me now from the warm tavern doorway back into the streets, where the fog hangs heavy and the glow of the lamps looks like tiny moons suspended in mist. The night is hushed, except for the steady clip-clop of a single horse's hooves. The sound echoes through narrow lanes, like a heartbeat you can almost drift off to. This story, set in 1851, might sound like a prank from a penny novel rather than a court record. It was the case of the man who stole umbrellas. Not one umbrella, not two, but dozens upon dozens gathered with almost obsessive zeal. Imagine him as a Victorian magpie, unable to resist the glossy handles and crisp canopies. He'd prowl the streets during sudden downpours, slipping umbrellas from distracted hands or lifting them neatly from stands outside shops. Picture it. Crowds scattering under a burst of rain, the air filled with the patter of droplets on cobblestones, and amidst the blur of black canopies, one wiry figure slipping away with yet another prize tucked under his arm. A kind of collector's madness, more than a thief's hunger. By the time the man was caught, his tiny lodging room had been transformed into something of a forest of umbrellas. Imagine stepping inside. Fabric blooms in every corner, handles poking like tree branches, the air carrying that faint metallic tang of rain-soaked cloth. The constables who arrested him were said to have laughed despite themselves, tripping over heaps of folded umbrellas as though they'd stumbled into an eccentric museum. And isn't it curious how crimes sometimes reveal more about human oddity than malice? A man who didn't steal to sell, nor to wield power, but perhaps simply to satisfy some strange, quiet compulsion. It reminds me of how we too sometimes hold on to things, not because we need them, but because their presence comforts us, like keeping an old scarf in a drawer, or a pebble from a long-ago walk by the sea. The court sentenced him lightly, though newspapers of the day called him the Umbrella King. A title both grand and ridiculous, don't you think? It sounds like something from a child's fairy tale, the kind you might half hear before sleep takes over. Let yourself linger with that image. Rows of umbrellas, their fabric whispering against one another whenever the window rattles. A hush, a rustle, a sound like soft rain even when the skies are dry. There's a drowsy comfort in that sound, a rhythm steady enough to rock you deeper into rest. And so, as the Umbrella King fades into the folds of history, we close the door of his cluttered room and return to the quiet street. The rain has stopped now, and the cobblestones glisten as though polished. The horses' hooves are gone, leaving only the low hum of night drawing us gently onward, towards yet another curious tale waiting in the shadows of the Victorian age. Let's wander now, leaving behind the shimmering cobblestones where the rain has dried. The fog begins to lift a little, and in the faint glow of dawn, lamps still flickering, you notice the soft scent of bread drifting from a nearby bakery. There's something soothing in that aroma. Warm loaves cooling on wooden racks, the crusts crackling faintly as they release steam. This chapter belongs to the tale of the pudding pickpocket, a nickname given by Londoners in 1862 to a man whose crimes revolved not around gold or jewels, but puddings. Rich, sticky, sweet puddings. Imagine the kind you might see cooling on a windowsill, dense with suet and fruit, steaming slightly as the cool air wrapped around it. The thief's method was simple. He would prowl the streets near bakeries and kitchens, waiting for the moment when housewives or shopkeepers set puddings outside to cool. And then, swift as a cat, he'd lift them, balancing the warm dish precariously in his arms as he darted into the labyrinth of alleys. Close your eyes for a moment and picture it. The weight of a pudding dish, the clatter of feet against stone, and the trail of sweet aroma drifting behind him like a calling card. Residents would chase, sometimes half-heartedly, sometimes laughing more than shouting as though they too recognized the absurdity. A criminal, yes, but hardly menacing, more a nuisance wrapped in raisins and treacle. When the pudding pickpocket was finally caught, his small lodging revealed not jewels nor coin, but a half-dozen half-eaten puddings stacked on a shelf. Some dried hard, others still sticky. It paints a picture less of a criminal mastermind and more of a man whose appetite steered him into foolishness. There's humour here, of course, but also something tender. Who among us hasn't been led astray by the scent of something warm and sweet, perhaps stealing a taste before dinner or sneaking a bite in the quiet of the night? His crime, magnified by the newspapers, became almost a bedtime story of its own, whispered to children as a warning not to leave their desserts unattended. And as we listen to this tale, let your own mind drift with the slow rhythm of the city, the clinking of horsetack in the distance, the muffled chatter of early morning traders, and the comforting idea that sometimes history's villains are simply men who wanted a little more pudding than their share. So we tuck away that image, soft cakes steaming in the cool air, their sweetness vanishing into the shadows, and we step once more into the winding lanes of Victorian London, ready to stumble upon the next strange, sleepy tale that history tucked between its pages. From the pudding-scented alleys we drift now toward the edge of the Thames. The water glimmers faintly, catching the pale light of gas lamps along the embankment. The river is slow tonight, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple of a barge slipping past. If you listen closely, you might hear the soft slap of water against the stone steps, steadier as a lullaby. This is where, in 1884, one of the strangest thefts of the Victorian era took place. Not of food this time, nor of umbrellas or parrots, but of oysters. Barrels and barrels of oysters. It sounds like the plot of a seaside comedy, doesn't it? Imagine men in flat caps and rough coats sneaking into a warehouse by the docks. Instead of stuffing their pockets with coins, they rolled away entire casks of oysters, their boots squelching in the damp mud as they worked in the shadows. Each barrel was heavy, the shells clinking softly inside, as though the sea itself had been bottled and hauled off into the night. At that time, oysters weren't the luxury we think of today. In Victorian London, they were cheap, almost considered the food of the working class. But a thief doesn't always chase luxury. Sometimes he just sees opportunity. With taverns and stalls eager to serve oysters by the plateful, a man with stolen barrels could make a small fortune selling them off, one salty mouthful at a time. Picture the scene. The thieves loading barrels onto a rickety cart, the horse snorting in protest at the extra weight, the wheels groaning as they rolled toward the city's heart. And behind them, the faint trail of briny air, like a tide that couldn't help but follow. When the crime came to light, the newspapers delighted in reporting it. They described the thieves as pirates of the pavement, and the city chuckled at the absurdity of it all. Some joked that London had been robbed not by brigands with pistols, but by seafood enthusiasts with strong backs. Eventually the men were caught, not because of clever detective work, but because the trail of shells gave them away. Wherever they sold their wares, piles of discarded oyster shells began to appear. The constables simply followed the heaps, like breadcrumbs, until they reached the culprits. There's a drowsy comfort in imagining it. Moonlight on the river, the creak of wooden barrels, and the steady rhythm of waves against stone. A crime that feels less threatening than it does silly, almost like a bedtime parable whispered over the sound of water. And as the oysters fade into history's tide, let your mind wander gently with the current, flowing onward to the next tale, waiting just beyond the bend of the river's misty curve. The river fades behind us now, its whispers growing softer, until all that remains is the faint scent of brine clinging to the air. We step into a quieter lane, the kind where lamplight trembles against shuttered windows, and the only sound is the shuffle of your own footsteps. Here, in 1872, unfolded the peculiar case of the gingerbread swindle. Imagine, if you will, a cheerful stall at the edge of a bustling fairground. The air is alive with fiddles playing jaunty tunes, children's laughter carrying through the cool evening, and the unmistakable sweetness of gingerbread wafting across the crowd. Shapes of little men and women, iced with careful loops of sugar stacked in neat rows, a delight as much for the eyes as for the tongue. The stall holder, a kindly woman with flour still dusted in her hair, had grown famous for her gingerbread. Crowds gathered each week, coins clinking as hands reached eagerly for the glossy treats. But amid the laughter and fiddles lurked a man with sharper eyes than most. He was no ordinary thief. He wasn't after one or two cakes, nor even a handful. Instead, he concocted a plan as elaborate as the sugar spirals decorating the biscuits. On the busiest evening of the fair, he appeared dressed as an assistant baker, apron tied neatly, cap pulled low. With an air of confidence, he walked straight behind the stall, nodded politely to the woman, and began handing out gingerbread to customers. Imagine the scene. Children giggling, reaching for sweets, mothers thanking him, the stall holder too harried by the crowd to notice. But here's the trick. He wasn't taking coins to hand back. He was pocketing them. Dozens of pennies clinked into his pouch while he passed gingerbread after gingerbread, smiling all the while. A performance so bold that it went unnoticed for nearly an hour. The deception unravelled only when the real assistant returned, tray in hand, and the two bakers stood side by side, one bewildered, the other frozen mid-gesture with a biscuit dangling between finger and thumb. The laughter that rippled through the crowd must have been louder than the fiddles. When caught, the man admitted he had no particular grudge, no hunger even. He simply thought it a clever way to fill his pockets while enjoying the fair. The judge later remarked it was a crime sugared over, more buffoonery than villainy. He was punished, of course, though lightly. Close your eyes a moment and imagine the warmth of those gingerbread biscuits, the faint crunch as you bite, the sweet spice lingering on your tongue. There's something soothing in that, isn't there? The idea that even crime, in its silliest forms, can taste of cinnamon and molasses. And so, as the fairground fiddles fade into the night and the air cools again, we step away from the laughter and the sugar-dusted stalls, wandering onward, deeper into the labyrinth of Victorian oddities waiting just around the next lamplit corner. From the gingerbread fairground, let us drift slowly into the quieter lanes where the music fades, leaving only the faint echo of laughter carried on the breeze. The lamps grow fewer here, their glow softer, and the night takes on that velvety stillness that makes every sound, every distant creak, every flutter of wings seem more vivid. It is here, in 1867, that London found itself puzzled by the case of the top hat trickster. Now, picture the Victorian gentleman's top hat. Tall, glossy, and so perfectly cylindrical, it could almost pass for a stovepipe balanced precariously on the head. They weren't just fashion, they were a symbol, a crown of social standing, and yet in one curious summer a man made it his business to steal them. Not just steal, in fact, he collected them. He would roam crowded streets and marketplaces, bumping into passers-by with elaborate apologies and in the shuffle slip away with their hats. Sometimes he swapped them, placing a battered old one on a man's head while lifting away the fine silk model. Other times he simply whisked them off and vanished into the crowd, leaving the victim blinking up at the sudden night air cooling their scalp. Isn't it almost funny, imagining the sight? Dozens of bewildered men standing bareheaded in the street, looking about as though a strong breeze had plucked the hats from their crowns. There's a drowsy amusement in it, a kind of comedy of manners played out beneath the flickering lamps. When the thief's room was finally raided, the constables found a tower of top hats so high it nearly brushed the ceiling. Imagine that for a moment, the faint scent of felt and polish, the soft hush as one brim brushed against another, a strange forest of fashion looming in the shadows. Why did he do it? Some thought he intended to resell them, but there was no sign of that. Others suggested it was obsession, an odd private satisfaction in the sheer number of hats. The papers, of course, dubbed him the Mad Hatter of Clerkenwell, a nickname that must have made readers chuckle as they sipped their evening tea. There's something soothing in the absurdity, isn't there? To think that crime could be nothing more than a game of hats, that history holds not just wars and politics, but these tiny pockets of human folly. And as you listen, let your breathing settle into the rhythm of the night, in, out, steady as footsteps echoing down a cobblestone street. The lamps glow, the air cools, and we leave behind the Mad Hatter's shadowy tower, wandering onward toward another forgotten tale that drifts like a half-remembered dream in the soft folds of Victorian history. We step now from the crooked lanes of Clerkenwell toward a marketplace where the night lingers just a little longer. The stalls have closed, canvas sheets pulled down, ropes tied neatly. Yet there's always a faint hum here, as though the day's clamour still vibrates in the air. The scent of apples, onions, and damp straw clings to the cobblestones. It was in this market, in 1859, that a crime unfolded which sounds more like a fable than a police report. The tale of the singing sausage theft. Picture the butcher's stall at dawn, strings of sausages hanging like garlands, their casings gleaming faintly in the morning light. The butcher, broad-shouldered and red-cheeked, was known not only for his meats but for his habit of singing loudly while he worked. A booming baritone carrying across the square like the call of a church bell. Roll out the barrel, he would sing, or some equally jolly tune, cleaver flashing in rhythm with his notes. On one peculiar morning, however, his song was interrupted. For when he reached to show off his finest sausages to a waiting customer, they were gone. Entire strings vanished. At first he thought he had misplaced them, absurd as that seemed. But whispers soon spread. Someone had stolen them in the night. The newspapers played it up as if it were high drama. "A villain most foul has robbed the butcher of his melody," one line read. For how can a man sing without his sausages? And though it sounds silly now, the theft became the talk of the market. Some swore they had seen a figure slipping through alleys with a bulging sack, the ends of sausages peeking out like ropes. Others claimed they'd heard faint squeaks, as if the stolen goods had been dragged along the stones. Eventually the thief was found, a local youth, hungry and reckless, who had tried to sell the sausages to taverns at half price. He confessed quickly, though one report claimed he laughed throughout his trial, saying it was worth it for the adventure. The butcher, for his part, recovered most of his goods, though he claimed the sausages had lost their dignity. Still, he returned to singing the very next day, voice echoing louder than ever, as if to declare that neither hunger nor theft could silence him. Imagine the scene, if you will. The rising sun gilding the market stalls, the air sharp with the scent of raw meat and morning dew, and a booming voice rolling out like a lullaby of its own. Strange comfort, isn't it? That even a theft of sausages could weave itself into the fabric of history. And as we drift from the marketplace, let the sound of that voice linger softly in your ears, fading into the hum of the city beyond, leading us toward the next odd tale that waits, patient as the night itself. From the marketplace of sausages and song, let us wander toward a quieter quarter of London. The streets here are narrow, pressed close by tall brick houses that lean inward as if to whisper secrets across the cobblestones. The air carries a faint scent of coal smoke and damp wool, and somewhere in the distance a dog barks lazily before falling silent again. It was here, in the spring of 1871, that neighbours began to murmur about a peculiar thief known later as the cucumber culprit. A strange title, isn't it? And yet the crime itself was stranger still. Cucumbers at that time were no rare luxury. They were grown in gardens, sold at markets, sliced into salads, and occasionally pickled with vinegar. But for one man, cucumbers were not simply food, they were treasure. Night after night he crept into gardens, lifting the long green vegetables with a reverence one might expect for silver candlesticks or gold coins. Imagine it, the quiet crunch of gravel underfoot, the rustle of leaves brushed by a hand, and the cool weight of a cucumber lifted carefully from its bed. He would tuck them into his coat pockets until they bulged like awkward lumps, then shuffle back into the shadows with his prize. By the time he was caught, his little flat resembled something between a greengrocer's stall and a gardener's shed. Cucumbers lined the table, the windowsill, even the mantelpiece. Some fresh, some half-eaten, some beginning to wilt. The constables who found him were baffled. When asked why, he simply replied, "I like the way they shine." Isn't that oddly soothing? The thought that in a city teeming with noise, smog, and the heavy machinery of industry, one man found comfort in the glossy skin of cucumbers. It feels less like a crime and more like an eccentric lullaby of human desire. The newspapers naturally had their fun. Headlines teased, "Cucumber mania grips the capital," and "green-fingered thief pickled by police." People chuckled in taverns, telling the tale as though it were a bedtime jest rather than a court proceeding. His sentence was mild, but his story lingered, rippling through the city like the crunch of a fresh cucumber slice between the teeth. There is something restful in that sound, isn't there? Crisp, clean, cooling, like biting into a piece of summer on a warm day. And so, as we leave behind that curious little flat filled with vegetables, let your mind picture the glistening green fading into the mist. The air grows cooler now, the lamps glow softer, and we step once more into the gentle current of history's oddities, flowing quietly toward the next story waiting in the shadows of the Victorian night. From the cucumber-filled flat, we wander slowly toward the broader streets, where the glow of the gas lamps stretches further and the cobblestones gleam faintly like polished glass. The night feels softer here, hushed by the distant roll of carriage wheels and the occasional hiss of steam escaping from some hidden pipe. It is here, in 1864, that the city whispered about the curious case of the pie pilferer. Imagine a bakery at dawn, the windows fogged with warmth, trays sliding from the oven one after another. Meat pies, golden and fragrant, cooling on wooden racks by the window. The smell alone, rich gravy, buttered crust, and the faint peppery bite of filling, would be enough to make passers-by stop in their tracks. The baker, a stout man with flour-dusted hands, grew proud of his reputation. His pies were said to be the best in the borough, hearty enough to feed a labourer after a long day. But then, quite suddenly, he began to notice them vanishing. Not by the dozen, not even by the tray, just one or two at a time, slipping away from his racks as if spirited off by invisible hands. It baffled him. He scolded his apprentices, accused his wife of selling them on the sly, and even set a small bell by the window ledge. But still the pies disappeared. Until one evening, after hiding quietly in the shadows of his own shop, he saw it. The thief was not a neighbour, nor a mischievous child, but a man in a long overcoat who slipped silently in, lifted a steaming pie with gloved hands, and vanished before the bell could even tinkle. The man was caught days later, and when pressed for his reasoning, he explained he could not resist the smell. He had no grand plan, no black market scheme, only a longing for pies so strong it pushed him to crime. There is something strangely soothing about it, isn't there? A city swirling with politics and industry, and yet one of its great mysteries boiled down to the irresistible pull of pastry. Perhaps you too can almost imagine holding that warm pie, the crust flaky under your fingers, steam rising in the cool morning air. The papers naturally had a feast of their own. They dubbed him the Phantom of the Pies, and the name stuck long after the trial ended. Some laughed, others shook their heads, but most secretly admitted they understood the temptation. After all, Who hasn't longed for something warm and savoury on a cold night? And so, we step away from that little bakery, leaving behind the golden pies and the soft hiss of ovens. The smell lingers faintly, like a dream that hovers just at the edge of sleep, comforting and familiar. And as we drift onward through London's winding lanes, we find ourselves ready to meet yet another curious tale from the dimly lit world of Victorian mischief. Leaving the bakery behind, we drift once more into the winding maze of London's night. The air has grown cooler now, the lamps haloed in mist, their glow trembling as though half asleep themselves. Somewhere nearby, a cat slinks across a rooftop, its paws soundless, its tail flicking lazily. The quiet is deep enough that you can almost hear your own heartbeat, keeping time with the city's slow breath. It was here, in 1878, that the tale of the teapot thief made its way into the newspapers. Now, teapots may sound like humble prizes for a crime, and indeed they were. But to Victorians, tea was no small matter. It was ritual, comfort, even a kind of ceremony stitched into daily life. To lose a teapot was not simply to lose a vessel, but to disturb the very rhythm of the household. The thief in question was not violent, nor particularly cunning. His method was simple. He would visit homes under the guise of a door-to-door repairman, offering to mend broken handles or polish tarnished metal. Smiling politely, hat in hand, he charmed his way past thresholds. And then, quietly, calmly, he would carry the teapots away, never to return. Imagine it, a polished silver teapot gleaming under gaslight, the faint scent of Earl Grey rising from its spout, the delicate clink of cups waiting beside it. And then, a stranger's hand lifting it gently, vanishing into the mist. When the thief was finally apprehended, his lodging astonished everyone. Shelves upon shelves of teapots, china painted with flowers, brass darkened with age, silver polished to a mirror's shine. He hadn't sold them, he hadn't hidden them, he simply collected them. One constable wrote in his notes, "The man seemed to love them more than life itself." And perhaps that was true. To us, it feels less like a crime and more like an odd kind of lullaby. A man surrounding himself with vessels of warmth and comfort, as though he wished to live forever inside the steam of a fresh pot of tea. The newspapers, of course, had their fun, dubbing him the Sultan of Teapots. Cartoons appeared, showing him sitting on a throne of kettles crowned with a lid, and yet one can't help but feel a little softness toward him. After all, what he gathered was not wealth, but warmth. As you listen, maybe you can almost hear it. The gentle pour of hot tea into a porcelain cup, the soft hiss of steam curling upward, the clink of spoon against rim, a sound steady and calming like rain against a window pane. And so, as the teapots fade into the quiet folds of memory, we step gently onward, deeper into London's sleeping streets, where another peculiar story waits, patient, hushed, and ready to carry us further into the soft embrace of night. From the shelves of teapots and the faint steam of imagined cups, we wander further into London's dim streets. The lamps here glow low and steady, casting golden puddles of light on the cobblestones, while the rest of the world is draped in the velvet shadows. Somewhere a clock tower tolls the hour, its chime deep and soft, carrying through the fog like the gentle pulse of the city itself. It was in 1869 that a most peculiar crime puzzled the magistrates, a case known later as the pocket handkerchief caper. Now, handkerchiefs may seem such small and delicate things, barely worth a mention, but in Victorian society they were more than cloth. They were tokens of elegance stitched with initials, perfumed lightly, tucked neatly into pockets or sleeves. To own a fine handkerchief was to display refinement, and to misplace one was a small embarrassment. And so, when dozens upon dozens began disappearing, the city was bemused. At first, people assumed they had simply lost them, but soon it became clear someone was taking them. The thief was bold, slipping through crowded streets and theatres, brushing against coats and dresses with such subtlety that no one noticed until later, when the pocket was found empty. Imagine the sound of a crowded theatre on a winter's evening, The hush before the curtain rises, the shuffle of boots on wooden floors, the faint rustle of silk gowns. Amidst all that, a man's hand gliding like a whisper, plucking a folded square of linen and vanishing before the owner even stirred. When he was finally caught, the discovery astonished everyone. In his room lay not jewels or coin, but a mountain of handkerchiefs, embroidered with flowers, edged in lace, stitched with monograms. Some pressed and folded neatly, others tossed carelessly in piles. Why did he do it? Not for money, though he could have sold them easily. He admitted with a sheepish smile that he loved the smell, the faint perfume, the lavender tucked in drawers, the lingering scent of soaps. To him, each cloth was a memory, a trace of its owner, a comfort. The newspapers, naturally, teased him without mercy, dubbing him the Prince of Pockets. Yet the tale carried with it less malice than melancholy, a man who gathered comfort where he could find it, even if it meant crossing the line of the law. And as you picture those folded squares, think of the softness of linen against fingertips, the whisper of fabric brushing together, the faintest trace of lavender drifting upward, a soundless lullaby, delicate and steady. And so we step out once more, leaving behind the handkerchief mountain and the quiet sigh of cloth. The night waits ahead, mist curling through the streets, carrying us gently onward to yet another story tucked in the quiet corners of Victorian London. From the perfumed folds of handkerchiefs, we drift deeper into London's sleeping quarters. The fog hangs thicker here, muffling sound, making each footstep seem hushed and far away. A lantern flickers faintly at the corner, its light shimmering through the mist like a firefly trapped in glass. The city feels quieter now, as though holding its breath, waiting for the next odd tale to unfold. It was in 1881 that newspapers carried whispers of what became known as the butter heist. Strange, isn't it? Butter, of all things. But in Victorian kitchens, butter was treasure, used not only for bread but for sauces, pastries, and nearly every comfort of the table. To steal it was to disturb the rhythm of mealtime itself. The culprit was a young delivery boy, entrusted with carrying fresh rolls of butter from the dairyman's cart to the households along his route. At first, no one suspected him. He was cheerful, quick-footed, and polite. But gradually, households began to notice their deliveries shrinking. Half a pound missing here, a roll smaller there. What they didn't see was the boy's little hiding place. Tucked beneath a loose plank in a shed near his lodgings, he stashed away pats of butter, wrapped carefully in cloth. Imagine it, a secret hoard, cool and faintly fragrant, waiting like buried treasure. When confronted, the boy admitted his crime, and here lies the curious part. He hadn't sold the butter, nor eaten much of it himself. He confessed he liked the way it felt, soft, smooth, yielding under his fingers, a comfort against the harshness of the city. The judge, trying to keep a straight face, called it a crime of dairy and daydreams. The sentence was light, for who could look at a boy smudged with butter and see a hardened criminal? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the texture yourself, the way a knife glides through a pat, the way it melts slowly against warm bread. There's something deeply calming in that image, isn't there? Almost like watching a candle burn slowly down, steady and sure. The city, of course, chuckled. Taverns repeated the story. Housewives shook their heads, and children laughed to think of butter tucked away like jewels. Another crime too odd to forget, softened by its very absurdity. And so, we leave behind that little shed with its secret stash, the faint scent of dairy fading into the night. The fog closes gently around us again, cool against the skin, guiding us softly onward toward another tale, waiting like a lamp glowing faintly in the haze of Victorian London. From the buttery haze of that little shed, we step once more into the heart of the city. The fog has thinned a little, replaced by the sharper chill of night air, and the cobblestones shine faintly as though brushed with moonlight. Somewhere nearby, a clock strikes the quarter hour, its echo soft and patient. The rhythm of the city feels like a lullaby, carrying us deeper into its curious stories. It was in 1855 that London spoke of a crime so peculiar it was remembered more for its comedy than its scandal, the tale of the jam jar burglary. Imagine a small grocer's shop, shelves lined neatly with preserves. Blackberry, gooseberry, plum, and strawberry, their colours glowing like jewels behind glass. The jars caught the morning light, casting tiny stained glass reflections across the counters. Sweetness sealed and stored away, waiting to be spooned onto bread or stirred into porridge. One night a thief slipped in, not for coin, not for tobacco or wine, but for jars of jam. He cleared an entire shelf, stuffing the clinking glass into a sack that bulged with sticky treasure. By the time he staggered back into the street, the bag dripped faintly, leaving a trail of sugared scent behind him. Neighbours awoke the next morning to whispers, a burglary without violence, without valuables, just jam. Some chuckled, others shook their heads, but all agreed it was strange. The constables followed the trail easily, sticky footprints leading them down alleys until they found the man in his lodgings, surrounded by open jars. He hadn't even bothered with bread, just a spoon and stained hands that told the whole story. When tried, he explained that he hadn't tasted jam since childhood, and the sight of it had overwhelmed him. There is something tender in that, isn't there? A crime not born of greed, but of longing for sweetness. Picture it for a moment, a spoon dipping into thick strawberry jam, the way it clings before sliding free, the taste bright and rich on the tongue. There's comfort in that thought, a gentle indulgence as soothing as drifting slowly towards sleep. The newspapers called him the Jam King, printing little cartoons of him perched on a throne of jars. And though the punishment was real, the memory lingered not as menace but as amusement, a story retold with chuckles over cups of tea. And so, we stepped softly away from that sugar-stained room, leaving behind the glimmer of glass jars and the scent of fruit in the air. The street grows quiet once more, mist curling at the edges, and we drift onward toward yet another odd tale, waiting quietly in the folds of Victorian night. From the sugar-scented room of jam jars, we step into a quieter part of London, where the night feels heavy with stillness. The fog has lifted just enough for the stars to glimmer faintly above, though the gas lamps still glow like sleepy guardians along the cobblestones. A soft breeze drifts through, carrying with it the faintest smell of hay from stables nearby, and the low snort of a horse breaks the silence before fading again. And it was in 1874 that this neighbourhood became the stage for what people called the loafer fair. Not jewels, not paintings, not gold, just bread. Loaves of warm, fragrant bread. A baker in the area had grown famous for his crusty loaves, baked golden and thick, their insides soft and steaming. Each morning he lined his shelves with dozens, and each evening his stock was sold out completely. But one week his numbers didn't add up. More loaves vanished than he had sold. Imagine his confusion, counting carefully, double-checking, shaking his head as flour dust drifted from his hair. He even accused his apprentices of nibbling, though the scale of the loss was far too large for a few hungry mouths. The mystery deepened until one dawn the baker rose earlier than usual and hid quietly in the shadows of his shop. And there he saw it. A young man, thin and pale, slipping in through the unlocked back door. He didn't run or snatch. He simply lifted 2 loaves, held them close as though they were treasure, and left silently into the fog. When confronted, the man confessed. He was a failed apprentice from another bakery, too ashamed to beg and too proud to starve. Bread was to him not just food, but dignity, the chance to eat with others, to feel whole again. The judge gave him a light sentence, perhaps moved by his honesty. The newspapers still chuckled, dubbing him the Lord of Loaves, but the tone carried more sympathy than mockery. Close your eyes a moment, and imagine a loaf still warm from the oven, the crust crackling softly as you tear it, the scent of yeast and flour rising like comfort itself. There's something deeply calming in that picture, isn't there? The idea of bread as not just nourishment, but solace. And so, with that warmth lingering faintly in the air, we step once more into the streets, leaving behind the baker's quiet shop. The lamps sway gently above, the cobblestones glisten faintly, and the night carries us onward, ready to reveal the next peculiar corner of Victorian history. From the warm scent of bread We drift now into a different quarter of the city. The streets here seem narrower, the lamps fewer, and the shadows deeper. A cat darts across our path, pausing for just a moment to glance back before vanishing into the dark. The faint sound of distant church bells carries on the breeze, each note stretching like a lullaby across the rooftops. It was in 1887 that London chuckled over the strange tale of the carrot conspiracy. Odd, isn't it? A vegetable hardly grand enough to inspire crime, yet here we are. The case began with a greengrocer who complained of nightly losses. His stall stood at the corner of a busy square, baskets piled with vegetables in careful pyramids. Each morning he noticed that one basket, the one filled with carrots, was lighter than it had been the night before. At first he blamed miscounting, then perhaps rats. But soon the truth revealed itself. Someone was stealing carrots, and only carrots. Imagine the scene. Rows of baskets, potatoes, cabbages, onions, all untouched. And yet the carrots, bright and orange, gone. It puzzled everyone. Why not the more valuable produce? Why not apples or peas? But night after night the pattern held true. When the thief was caught, it turned out to be a man who lived nearby, known for his poor eyesight. He explained almost sheepishly that he believed carrots could cure his vision. He'd read it in a pamphlet, and so every evening he crept to the stall, stuffing his pockets with as many as he could carry. His room, when searched, was lined with bundles of carrots, some fresh, others shriveled, none particularly helping his cause. The court treated it as a light affair, though the newspapers had their fun, calling him the Rabbit of Whitechapel. Children giggled, adults shook their heads, and the grocer finally laughed himself, saying he'd never look at carrots the same way again. There's something oddly soothing in that image, isn't there? The soft crunch of a carrot between the teeth, the bright sweetness that surprises you even though you expect it. It feels like a sound as much as a taste. Crisp, clean, sharp, like a little bell chiming in your mouth. And so, we leave behind that stall with its baskets lined neatly in the early dawn, the mist curling once more around the edges of the square. The sound of church bells fades into the night, and we drift onward, ready for another tale that history tucked quietly away in its stranger corners. From the carrot-filled stalls of Whitechapel, we wander further into the city where the streets grow quieter still. The fog curls low, hugging the cobblestones, and a lamplighter makes his slow way down the lane, pole in hand, tapping each lamp until the soft glow spreads along the road like beads of light on a string. The night air tastes faintly of soot and chimney smoke, but there is a calmness in it too, like the hush just before sleep. It was in 1866 that the city laughed and puzzled over what was called the feather pillow fiasco. Not jewels, not coins, not silks, just pillows stuffed thick with goose feathers, stolen one by one. Imagine the sound of a Victorian bedroom at night, the creak of a bed frame, the faint whisper of a blanket being pulled up, and the soft sigh of a head sinking into a feather pillow. Such a simple comfort, yet someone had decided it was worth stealing. The thief was unusual in his approach. He didn't take them from shops or warehouses. Instead, he slipped into houses left unlocked during the day, ignoring valuables and silverware, lifting only pillows. When caught, his small lodging was discovered to be overflowing. Piles of pillows stacked so high they nearly touched the ceiling, their seams bursting, feathers floating in the air like soft snow. Picture it. A room filled with drifting feathers, the faint rustle of fabric whenever one pillow slid against another, the air light and tickling with down. It must have been less a criminal den and more like stepping into a dreamscape. When questioned, he confessed he couldn't sleep without them. One pillow, two pillows, even three weren't enough. He wanted to be surrounded by them, cushioned on every side, lost in softness. It wasn't greed, but an odd longing for comfort that drove him. The newspapers dubbed him the Feather King, and the trial was remembered more for laughter than outrage. Some whispered that perhaps he was simply tired, a weary soul searching for rest in the embrace of feathers. And as you imagine that scene, let yourself feel it too, the weight of a soft pillow under your head, the faint give as it moulds to you, the way it seems to cradle you like a gentle hand. There's a drowsy calm in that thought, enough to ease your breathing, slow and steady like the drift of feathers in quiet air. So we leave behind the room of drifting down, stepping softly back into the lamplit street. The mist hangs low, the lamps glow warmly, and the city sighs around us, carrying us onward towards yet another peculiar story folded gently into the fabric of Victorian London. From the feather-strewn room, we step back into the night air, brushing a few imagined downy wisps from our shoulders. The lamps glow steady now, their light catching on the damp stones, and somewhere nearby the sound of a clockmaker's tiny shop still ticks on, though the windows are dark. There's a stillness here that feels like a held breath, the kind that invites drowsiness. It was in 1870 that a peculiar story reached the ears of Londoners, a tale remembered as the spoon snatcher's mischief. Now, spoons hardly seem worth a thief's attention. They're small, common, easy to overlook. Yet in Victorian homes, cutlery wasn't just for eating, it was a matter of pride. Polished silver spoons laid neatly on a table signaled dignity, refinement, and order. And so, when spoons began disappearing from households across the city, confusion spread like ripples in still water. The thief was crafty, but not violent. He slipped into kitchens when cooks stepped away, or crept through windows left ajar on summer nights. He never touched knives, never forks, always and only spoons. The trail baffled constables until his hiding place was found. An old trunk beneath his bed, rattling faintly with the clink of dozens upon dozens of spoons. Picture that sound, the soft metallic jingle as they shifted, like distant wind chimes in a forgotten attic. Some were dented, some ornate, some so plain they could have come from any household. He hadn't sold them, hadn't melted them down, hadn't even used them. When asked why, his answer was simple. He liked the way they shone in the lamplight. The newspapers dubbed him the magpie of Marylebone, comparing him to the bird that collects shiny trinkets for no reason beyond fascination. London chuckled, and even the judge suppressed a smile as he handed down a modest punishment. And there is something soothing in that, isn't there? The image of a room lit only by a flickering lamp, a trunk open, its contents gleaming softly like moonlight captured in metal. Imagine running a finger along the curve of a silver spoon, cool to the touch, smooth and steady, the clink of others beneath it rising like a lullaby of polished echoes. So we leave that room of shimmering trinkets behind, stepping once more into the misty street. The air is cool, the lamps glow gently, and the city waits with another story tucked quietly in its folds, ready to lead us further into the soft drift of Victorian oddities. From the clinking trunk of spoons, we drift onward into a quieter lane where the fog has thinned to a silvery veil. The cobblestones are damp beneath our feet, reflecting faint pools of lamplight. A dog barks once in the distance, then settles back into silence. The whole city seems to sway gently in its slumber, as if rocking itself to sleep. It was in 1862 that London chuckled over the curious tale of the candle caper. Candles, humble as they seem, were lifelines of the night before electricity spread widely. To steal them was to steal not just light, but safety, comfort, and the ability to chase shadows away. The thief was a peculiar figure, thin, quiet, and always seen lingering near shops that sold wax goods. His method was simple. Slip inside during the bustle of the day and lift a few candles at a time, tucking them into his coat as though they were nothing more than pencils or sticks of chalk. At first, no one noticed. A missing candle here, another there. But as weeks passed, entire bundles vanished. Shopkeepers puzzled, customers grumbled, and finally constables laid a trap. When they entered his lodging, the discovery was almost dreamlike. Candles of every size and shape crowded the room. Tall tapers, stubby stumps, thick columns, and delicate ones scented faintly of lavender or rose. Some burned steadily in holders, their flames flickering, others lay stacked in heaps, wax gleaming like ivory. The room glowed so brightly it seemed more like a chapel than a chamber. When asked why, he smiled faintly and said, "I like the way the dark retreats." There's a certain calm in that, isn't there? Picture yourself in that room, surrounded by the soft light of dozens of flames. Each one sways gently, a golden dance, their warmth blending together until the shadows have no place to hide. The faint hiss of melting wax, the steady glow, it feels less like crime and more like a lullaby of light. The newspapers dubbed him the Candle King, sketching little cartoons of him crowned with wax drippings, his throne glowing with tiny flames. Though he faced punishment, many secretly admired him. After all, who doesn't long for a little more light in the dark? And so, as the last candle flickers out in memory, we step once more into the foggy streets. The lamps outside seem dimmer after such brilliance, but the quiet hum of the city carries us onward, inviting us towards yet another tale waiting in the folds of the Victorian night. From the glowing chamber of candles we step back into the misty street. The night feels cooler now, the air tinged faintly with coal smoke from chimneys, and the cobblestones glisten as if polished by invisible hands. Somewhere nearby, a carriage rattles over uneven stones, the sound fading quickly into the hush. The city breathes slowly, like a great creature at rest. It was in 1883 that London heard whispers of the sugar sack swindle. Sweetness itself had become the object of crime. At that time, sugar was precious, not the common everyday staple it would later become. To sweeten tea or cakes was to add a touch of luxury, a sparkle of comfort to daily life. And so, when merchants began complaining that their heavy burlap sacks of sugar were being tampered with, suspicion quickly spread. The thief was clever. Instead of hauling entire sacks away, which would have drawn attention, he carefully slit the bottoms with a knife, collecting what spilled out into his own bag. By the time the merchant arrived in the morning, the sack looked untouched, until it was lifted, half its weight mysteriously gone. Imagine the soft spill of sugar crystals, tiny grains pattering into a sack like the sound of sand sliding through an hourglass. A quiet theft, more whisper than roar. When the culprit was caught, the scene was almost comical. His small room held no riches, no gold, no jewels, only piles of sugar heaped in jars, bowls, and even teacups, as though he lived in a world frosted over by sweetness. He confessed with no shame at all, saying simply, "I cannot help but crave it." The newspapers dubbed him the Sugar Ghost, printing caricatures of a man drifting through walls, leaving trails of crystals behind him. London chuckled, half scandalized, half amused. After all, who among them didn't sweeten their tea with a guilty extra spoonful now and then? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine dipping a spoon into a sugar jar, the faint crunch as crystals shift, the sparkle of white against silver, the way it dissolves in hot tea, softening the bitterness. There is something soothing in that, like a sweetness that lingers on the tongue and in the memory. And so, as the sugar fades into the shadows of history, we step gently onward. The lamps flicker, the mist curls once again around the corners of the street, and the quiet hum of London at rest carries us toward yet another curious tale, waiting softly just beyond the next turn. From the sugar-laden room, sparkling faintly like frost in memory, we drift once more into the night. The lamps burn low now, their glow softer, almost sleepy themselves. The streets are hushed, cobblestones damp, and the air carries a faint trace of wood smoke and bread from distant ovens. There's a rhythm to the silence, like the steady hum of a lullaby hidden beneath the city's breath. It was in 1858 that London became amused by what was later called the cheese roll ruse. Not fine jewels, not banknotes, just wheels of cheese, round and heavy, lifted in the most curious way. A small cheesemonger in Holborn had grown frustrated. His shelves, carefully stacked with rounds of cheddar and Cheshire, seemed to shrink by morning. At first he suspected his apprentices of nibbling too generously. But the losses grew larger, whole wheels vanishing overnight. The culprit, when revealed, surprised everyone. It wasn't a gang of thieves, nor even a desperate beggar, but a cab driver. Each evening after his fares dwindled, he would park quietly near the shop, slip inside through a window he'd discovered could be eased open, and roll the cheeses one by one into his carriage. Imagine the sound, the soft thud of a wheel hitting the wooden floor, the faint wobble as it settled, the horse shifting in protest at the growing weight. By the time he was caught, his modest stable looked like a dairy cellar. Rounds stacked neatly against the wall, some already sliced, others wrapped carefully in cloth. He admitted with a sheepish smile that he never ate them all himself. He sold some to taverns, yes, but he kept the best for his own late-night suppers, claiming that a cabman's life is long and cheese shortens it sweetly. The newspapers, of course, had their fun. They called him the coachman of cheddar, sketching drawings of a horse-drawn cab rattling down the lane with cheeses tumbling from the back. Londoners laughed, and the story was retold for years whenever someone mentioned Holborn. There's a soothing image in it, isn't there? A wheel of cheese, golden rind glowing in lamplight, the knife cutting through with a faint crumble, the taste sharp and comforting. A food both humble and indulgent, much like the story itself. And so, as we leave behind that carriage rattling with stolen wheels, we step back into the lamplit night. The mist curls gently at our feet, the lamps sway faintly in the breeze, and the quiet city waits with another peculiar tale, resting softly in its folds. From the rattling carriage of cheese wheels, we wander into another corner of the city where the fog feels thicker, curling low around doorsteps and chimneys. The lamps glow faintly, their light blurred as though seen through frosted glass. The air smells of coal smoke and damp stone, and somewhere a violin drifts faintly from an upstairs window, its notes slow and plaintive, like a lullaby for the street itself. It was in 1861 that London told the strange tale of the apple barrel affair. Simple apples, nothing more, were at the heart of this curious theft. At Covent Garden Market, barrels of apples arrived each morning from farms outside the city. Shiny green, blushing red, some tart, some sweet, piled high and rolling slightly whenever a barrel was jostled. But one stallholder noticed something odd. Every morning, one of his barrels seemed lighter than the rest. At first, he blamed the farmers, then the porters. But when the pattern continued, he grew suspicious. The truth revealed itself one misty dawn, when a constable hid behind a stack of crates. There he saw a boy, no more than 12, lifting apples one by one from a barrel, slipping them into a sack, and humming softly to himself as though the work were a gentle game. He didn't run, didn't hide, just plucked steadily, as calm as a bird collecting twigs. When caught, the boy explained he had no thought of selling them. He simply loved apples, loved their crunch and their sweetness. His room proved it true, a basket brimming with them, half-eaten cores tucked in corners, the faint perfume of fruit filling the air. The newspapers, amused, dubbed him the orchard thief of London. Some scolded, others smiled, but most secretly understood. After all, who hasn't reached for just one more apple from a tempting barrel, unable to resist its gleam? Close your eyes for a moment and picture it. The snap of a bite into a crisp apple, the juice running sharp and sweet, the sound echoing in the stillness of the night. A simple comfort, a sound so steady it might guide you gently towards sleep. And so, we leave behind the barrels and baskets, the faint perfume of fruit drifting into the fog. The violin fades from its window, the lamps sway faintly in the mist, and the city's quiet breath carries us forward, towards yet another soft story waiting in the folds of Victorian night. From the apple-scented market of Covent Garden, we drift slowly into another quarter where the streets grow wide again. The fog has lifted just enough to reveal rooftops against the night sky, their chimneys puffing faint curls of smoke. The lamps burn low, their flames swaying gently in the breeze, and somewhere in the distance a church bell tolls, soft and hollow, like a heartbeat in the dark. It was in 1879 that London chuckled over the curious case of the pudding basin plot. Yes, puddings again, though this time not sweet ones cooling on windowsills, but the very basins used to make them. A cook in a respectable household began to notice her kitchenware shrinking. At first she thought she had misplaced them, perhaps lent one to a neighbour, perhaps left one in the scullery. But soon entire basins vanished. Heavy earthenware, smooth and round, gone as if spirited away. The culprit turned out to be a lodger from the same street, a man who worked odd jobs and lived alone. Each evening he slipped quietly into kitchens left unattended, taking nothing of value but the pudding basins themselves. When constables raided his room, they found stacks of them, some filled with trinkets, others holding nothing at all. A whole collection of basins, arranged neatly along shelves and windowsills, catching lamplight in their glazed curves. When asked why, he shrugged and said simply, "They make good drums." And indeed, neighbours recalled faint tapping sounds at night, soft rhythms beating through the thin walls, like lullabies played on hollow clay. The newspapers laughed, calling him the Basin Bandit, sketching cartoons of him, leading an orchestra of pots and pans. The judge, though stern, admitted the case was one of the strangest he had seen. Close your eyes and imagine it. The faint tap-tap-tap of a spoon against pottery, steady and calming like rain on a rooftop. A rhythm that soothes as much as it bemuses. And so, we leave behind that room filled with earthenware echoes, the faint drumming fading into the quiet of the night. The lamps flicker gently, the fog curls low once more, and the city whispers onward, guiding us toward one final tale before our long journey of Victorian oddities comes to rest. From the echo of pudding basins tapped like sleepy drums, we drift once more into the quiet lanes of London. The night feels heavier now, softer too, as though the city itself is dozing. The lamps glow faintly, their light no more than halos in the fog, and the cobblestones glisten with a damp sheen as if reflecting dreams instead of rain. It was in 1868 that the tale of the butterfly book burglar fluttered through the papers. Not jewels, nor gold, nor even food this time, but books. Oddly chosen books, too. He didn't steal entire shelves or rare tomes bound in leather. Instead, he slipped into shops and carried away only small volumes about butterflies. Imagine the narrow aisles of a Victorian bookshop. The smell of ink and paper, the hush of pages being turned, the creak of wooden floorboards under boots. Among rows of Dickens, histories and sermons, the thief reached only for brightly illustrated guides filled with delicate wings and careful sketches. When constables discovered his room, it was like stepping into a strange garden. The walls were lined not with flowers but with pictures of butterflies clipped from the books, pinned neatly in rows. The air smelled faintly of glue and paper, and the colours, coppers, blues, oranges, glimmered in lamplight as though the wings themselves were alive. When asked why, the man said softly, "They are too beautiful to leave behind." There was no profit in it, no grand scheme, just a longing for brightness in a city of smoke and fog. The newspapers teased him gently, calling him the collector of clouds. And yet many found the story touching. For who has not wanted to hold on to something delicate, something fleeting, something that seems to shimmer just out of reach? Close your eyes a moment and picture those butterfly wings, thin as whispers, glowing in patterns that look almost like stained glass. A beauty so fragile it feels as though it might crumble if you breathe too hard. And yet in memory, they remain steady, like a dream you can return to again and again. And so, with the butterfly thief fading into the folds of history, we step slowly back into the misty streets. The lamps dim, the air cools, and the stories settle around us like blankets, strange, silly, tender and comforting. Each one a reminder that even in times of industry and hardship, humanity found its way to whimsy, folly and warmth. The night was cool in 1868, and the fog lay heavy across London like a great woolen blanket, soft and muffling. The gas lamps glowed faintly, their flames blurred in the damp air, and the cobblestones glistened as though polished by unseen hands. The city moved slowly at that hour, occasional carriages rattling by, the faint cry of a newspaper boy fading into the mist, and the steady hush of boots on stone. It was in this quiet atmosphere that a peculiar story began to take shape. Bookshops across the city, small, narrow rooms with windows crowded by dusty volumes, reported that something was amiss. Not grand theft, not violent burglary, but a series of vanishings so delicate they almost went unnoticed. Books were missing. Not whole shelves, not rare religious manuscripts or costly histories. Only one type of book disappeared, those with butterflies on their pages. Imagine, if you will, stepping into one of those Victorian bookshops. The air is heavy with the scent of ink and paper, tinged faintly by the wax of candle stubs burning low. Wooden floors creak gently beneath your shoes, and rows of leather-bound volumes stand like solemn guardians, their spines glowing faintly in the dim light. Perhaps you reach out, brush your fingers along the smooth edge of a gilt title, hear the faint whisper of a page turning nearby. And yet, in these hushed sanctuaries of knowledge, one curious detail could not be ignored. The books about butterflies, illustrated guides with delicate sketches and hand-coloured wings, were gone. Not torn, not misplaced, but lifted entirely, as if spirited away by invisible hands. Shopkeepers frowned, scratching their heads. Customers muttered. Some suggested mischievous boys, others thought perhaps collectors had grown bold. But the pattern became undeniable. Wherever there were books on butterflies, those were the ones taken. Everything else remained untouched. Isn't it strange to think about? In a city filled with poverty, smog, and the lure of valuables, someone risked discovery only for slender volumes filled with fragile wings. No gold, no jewels, not even food. Just pictures of butterflies, as if beauty itself had been the true treasure. The mystery deepened with each passing week, and soon whispers carried through taverns and parlours alike. The butterfly burglar, some called him. The man who preferred wings of paper over pockets of coin. And as you picture that, let your mind drift into the lamplit shop once more. Shelves tall and shadowed, the air quiet except for the faint rustle of pages, and a single gap where a butterfly book once rested, waiting to be found in some hidden corner of the city. The whispers about missing butterfly books grew louder as days turned into weeks. Londoners, always eager for a curious tale, began to trade theories as though they were gossip over tea. Some said a rich collector had hired a thief to fill his shelves with wings. Others imagined a secret society, studying insects by lamplight, stealing what they needed from bookshops too small to resist. But the truth was stranger still, and far more tender. Step with me into one of those Victorian bookshops again. The hour is late, the shutters drawn, but inside the room still holds the ghost of its daily bustle. You can almost smell the blend of old paper and damp coats, hear the echo of conversations, buyers asking about sermons, poets searching for inspiration, children tugging at sleeves for picture books. The shelves groan under the weight of knowledge. Histories of kings, scientific journals, novels serialized in volumes. And yet, amid all this seriousness, the butterfly book stood out. Slender bindings, modest in price, filled with plates so colourful they seemed to glow in the lamplight. Pale yellows, deep indigos, fiery reds, the wings hand-painted by patient artists whose brushes captured nature's smallest wonders. Now picture the thief slipping in. He was not loud nor hurried. He didn't smash windows or scatter books. Instead, he moved like a shadow, fingertips gliding over spines until they rested on one of those delicate guides. He would ease it gently from the shelf, close it carefully under his arm, and leave with the quietest of footsteps. One by one, the butterfly volumes vanished, and each time the gap left behind seemed larger than the book itself, as if a piece of colour had been plucked from the grey fabric of the city. The shopkeepers began to shake their heads, but there was little anger. After all, these were not grand treasures, yet the oddness of it made the story spread. Imagine men in taverns retelling it by firelight, mugs of ale in hand, chuckling. Not a farthing taken, not a jewel missing, only butterflies. And there's a soft comfort in that thought, isn't there? That even in a city weighed down by soot and industry, someone was compelled not by greed, but by beauty. A thief who saw more value in fragile wings than in piles of gold. Let yourself picture the lamplight shining across those pages, the fine lines of each sketch, the colours glowing softly like stained glass. Can you almost feel the hush of the shop around you, the faint smell of ink, the stillness of books waiting patiently to be read? It is a silence deep enough to lull you, like a whisper inviting you deeper into dreams. The mystery deepened until, at last, the thief was caught, and when constables stepped into his lodging, what they found was not a den of crime, but a place that seemed almost enchanted. Though in its own shabby way, imagine a small room at the top of a narrow staircase, its ceiling sloped, the window rattling softly against the night breeze. The air inside carried the faint, comforting scent of glue and pressed paper, mingled with the mustiness of too many books crowded together. And there, lining the walls, were the treasures he had stolen, not locked away, not hidden in trunks but displayed lovingly. Books of butterflies, their pages opened wide, leaned against the walls as if they were windows into another world. Clippings had been cut carefully from some volumes, pinned neatly in rows across the plaster. The colours glowed in the lamplight. Brilliant blues, soft oranges, fiery reds, delicate whites, like fragments of a summer meadow transplanted into a grey London attic. Picture yourself standing there. Feathers of colour shimmer around you, faint shadows of wings painted long ago dancing on the walls. The room is quiet except for the tick of a small clock and the soft crackle of a lamp wick burning low. If you lean closer, you can almost imagine the wings stirring, as if the butterflies might take flight at any moment. The constables were baffled. No gold, no jewels, no schemes of profit, just a patchwork world of wings, carefully arranged by a man who seemed less like a criminal and more like a dreamer who had stolen beauty for himself. It must have felt like stepping into a dream, don't you think? A London room transformed into a secret garden, where butterflies glowed in lamplight instead of fluttering through meadows. A fragile sanctuary built from paper and ink. As the officers shuffled quietly through the cramped space, feathers of dust rising with each step, one of them later recalled in his notes, "The man looked happier surrounded by wings of paper than others do with pockets full of coin." And there is something deeply soothing in that thought, that even in a city of iron, coal and hard edges, someone longed so deeply for beauty that he built a world of butterflies from stolen pages. So let yourself linger in that room a little longer. Picture the glow of lamplight softening the colours, the hush of paper hanging in the air, the stillness of wings frozen yet radiant. It feels like a lullaby in ink and colour, doesn't it? The man himself sat quietly when questioned, his hands folded as if in prayer, his eyes drifting more often to the butterfly pages than to the stern faces around him. He did not look like a villain, nor even like a trickster. Instead, he looked weary, like someone who had been carrying a secret too delicate for the world. When asked why, he gave no grand speech, no complicated excuse. His words were soft, almost like a lullaby themselves. "They're too beautiful to leave behind." And in that single sentence, the heart of his story was revealed. He hadn't stolen for profit. He hadn't sold the books, hadn't torn the pages to make a fortune. He had simply wanted to keep them close, to surround himself with wings of colour in a city grey with soot and stone. Imagine him at night, in that small attic room, lamp burning low, the fog pressing against the window. He would sit quietly, turning pages one by one, studying the delicate veins painted on each wing, the soft arc of colour. Outside, London thundered with carriages and factory wheels, but inside he floated in silence, a world of butterflies to himself. There is something almost childlike in that picture, isn't there? Like a boy pressing wildflowers between the pages of a book, unwilling to let them fade, a tenderness hidden beneath the surface of crime. The magistrate, when the case came before him, struggled to hide a smile. Though the law required a punishment, even he admitted it was unlike any theft he had seen. "A crime," he said softly, "committed in devotion to beauty." And the man bowed his head, as though embarrassed not by the sentence but by the attention. He had never sought to be noticed. He had only wanted to keep a piece of brightness for himself. Let your mind rest on that thought for a moment. A figure alone in a quiet room, cradling a book of butterflies as if it were a lantern in the dark. A small rebellion against the greyness of life. A private dream stitched together from ink and wings. It is soothing to imagine, isn't it? That sometimes even the strangest crimes carry within them a longing not for gold but for colour, for tenderness, for something gentle enough to calm the soul. The city of London, always hungry for stories, seized upon the case with delight. The newspapers printed it not with outrage, but with a kind of playful wonder. Cartoons appeared showing the thief with butterfly wings sprouting from his back, fluttering away from angry booksellers. Others sketched him perched on stacks of books, crowned with a wreath of paper butterflies. They called him the Collector of Clouds, a name that lingered long after the trial was done. And in taverns, men chuckled over mugs of ale, retelling the tale with exaggerated flutters of their hands. Housewives whispered it to one another while shopping at the market, and children giggled at bedtime, imagining a burglar sneaking through the night not with jewels in his pocket, but with tiny wings. There was laughter, yes, but also a kind of quiet admiration. For while London was a place of smoke and soot, of factories and hard labour, here was a man who had risked his freedom for nothing more than beauty on a page. In a city where most thefts were born of hunger or greed, his crime seemed almost innocent, even poetic. Imagine the contrast. Outside, the clang of machinery, the endless roar of wheels, the harsh cries of street vendors. Inside his little attic, silence, colour and wings so delicate they seemed to hush the noise of the world. Some even argued he'd done no true harm, that he had simply gathered fragments of brightness in a place too grey. And perhaps that is why the story lasted. It became less a tale of crime and more a gentle reminder that even in the hardest times, people long for beauty, for softness, for wonder. Picture those tavern fires crackling as the tale was retold, the sound of mugs clinking, the laughter of tired workers softening into sighs as they imagined the thief's glowing room of paper wings. The story soothed them in its own strange way, like a bedtime story for a weary city. And so, the butterfly burglar became part of London's fabric, his odd devotion remembered not with anger, but with a kind of fond amusement, like a dream too strange and tender to forget. And so, the tale of the butterfly burglar drifts gently into memory, like wings vanishing into the dusk. His name faded, but his story lingered, carried on whispers and smiles, told again and again when nights were long and fires burned low. Picture it one last time, that small attic room glowing with lamplight, walls alive with colours, blue as summer skies, orange as autumn leaves, pale as moonlight on snow. The pages did not flutter, yet they seemed to breathe, their wings delicate as whispers. In a city wrapped in soot and shadow, he had stitched together a secret meadow, fragile but bright. There's a comfort in that thought, isn't there? That even the strangest acts can be born not from greed, but from longing for beauty. That a man could risk his freedom for nothing more than butterflies painted in ink, wings too fragile to fly, yet strong enough to carry his heart. Let yourself rest in that image, wings glowing softly, the lamplight steady, the quiet of London pressing against the window. Outside, the world grows darker, quieter, slower. Inside, the room is filled with colour and stillness, a lullaby spun not from music but from paper and light. And now, as we step away from that room, the city grows softer too. The lamps dim, the cobblestones glisten faintly, and the fog curls around us like a blanket. We leave behind the wings and the pages, carrying only their calm glow in our minds, and with that, dear friend, our long journey through Victorian oddities comes to an end. From cucumbers to candles, from cheese to butterflies, each tale was small, strange, and tender in its own way, just enough to carry us gently through the night. May these soft stories guide you now into dreams, where even the oddest memories feel like lullabies. If you drifted off somewhere along the way, let me know when you wake. Your dreams are part of this wandering too. And if this quiet storytelling brought you rest, you may choose to tap like or subscribe, only if it feels right, like pulling a blanket a little closer. For now, I'll leave you with silence, with calm, and with the softest of good nights. Sweet dreams, until we walk together again.